Welcome to the Pursuit of Progress podcast, where we dive into the challenges, the issues that new coaches and trainers in the fitness industries face by bringing in some great minds like the individual I have on here today to help you guys download some of their successes, strategies, and maybe even their failures along the way as you navigate getting into the fitness industry and becoming a personal trainer. Coach Lee Boyce, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Love it. All the way from Canada.
Yeah, I love here in Toronto. It's finally actually getting a little bit warmer here, which is great because we had a pretty long winter. And to be honest, through May, it was pretty good weather. So that's early for us. We usually get it a lot later than that.
I love it, man. I love it. So you got the honor of being, and I mean, you know what, as I've gotten to know my Canadian fitness brothers and sisters, there's a lot of great stuff going on in the fitness industry in Canada, but you are the first Canadian on the Pursuit of Progress podcast. So you own that title.
Love it.
For those of you guys who are listening to this via audio, if you want to have some more fun with us, then head over to YouTube. Also available on Spotify are video versions of this podcast. So just make sure you guys tune into those so you can check out the stud that I have in front of me. And for those of you guys who maybe you've been living on a rock, maybe you haven't read anything in years and you haven't heard of my man, Coach Lee Boyce. He is a well-known fitness educator, coach and trainer. And that's one thing that I love about Coach Lee Boyce as I've gotten to hear him speak even this past year, is that although he's done so many more things now, he's a regular contributor and writer in, organizations like T Nation, Men's Health, Men's Fitness, lots of magazines, as well as bodybuilding.com, all kinds of places, pretty long list. You still identify as a trainer. I like that. Why is that?
Because if it wasn't a trainer, then none of these things would have been possible in the sense of, I think that it starts with being really good at what you do or having a good ownership over your craft in order to really be able to teach people about it or to educate people in any medium, whether that's teaching, whether that's speaking, whether that's writing about it and being able to get published by different publications. And so if you don't have a good command over what it is you do in the trenches, doing the real thing, then the rest is not going to come easily for you, or you're going to be faking it till you make it. So in my case, like I will always refer to myself as a trainer first because A, that was first in the order of things that I did and accomplished, but B, it's what I don't think I'll ever stop doing that piece, working with clients. And I think it's the most valuable and important part of the whole pie.
I love that. And I think that's something I just wanted to point out, even for you guys that are listening, mostly because I can relate to getting into the industry and like starting to get good at training. And the funny thing about being good at one thing is people start to present you opportunities for other things. And then it's easy to think that like, oh, somehow, training is no longer still the priority. But, from talking to you, Coach, even some of the others I've had on the podcast as well, so far, a true coach at heart. So maybe more so selfishly, like I'm interested because I've gotten to know you a little bit on the speaking side of things, been at a couple of events with you, which has been a lot of fun. But I would love to know a little bit more about like the OG origin story. Like, how did you get started in training? Talk to us a little bit about that, just so people have a better idea of, where you're coming from and how that started for you.
So I would go back to high school for my first real, the inception toward being interested in this sort of thing. And in high school, I was a sports athlete. I played everything, basketball, football, track, baseball, volleyball. And in high school, I was always sort of deciding what I wanted to do, where I wanted to take things and so on. And the first idea that I had was like, okay, do what the generic parents want, which is, including mine, which is, doctor or lawyer, become a doctor or lawyer, that kind of thing. Right? I didn't really truly have interest, but I was just trying to appease them. And so I said that was what I was interested in. And then when I got a little bit more wits about me, then I was like, okay, you know what? I got to do something that I like to do. And I'm really sporty. That's what I like to do. And so then I figured out there was a course in high school called exercise science or kinesiology, but exercise science was what they call it in high school. And so I took the course, really enjoyed it. And then I went to a different school to finish off high school, and they had the course still, and I took it again, even though I got an A in it the first time. And it was good because it was like two different sets of pieces of information, different approaches to the same curriculum, basically. And so I learned a whole bunch of new stuff the second time around. And there are certain assignments in that course, especially the second time, that really stuck with me to this day. And that was what really piqued my interest, even on a greater level, getting into kinesiology, into fitness studies and all that sort of thing. And so in university, I was doing kinesiology, and I was a track athlete. I was on the varsity track team as well as a sprinter, long jumper. And at the time, I was like, okay, exercise science, anatomy, all that stuff, this is great. I want to be a chiropractor. That's what I want to do. And I wanted to get into some kind of rehabilitative field. And then I was like, but, as I continue doing this, do I want to work with patients who are, injured most of the time, or do I want to work with healthy people to pursue fitness? Well, I think that I would have more fun and enjoyment doing the fitness side of things. And so that's where I decided to take things. And, I actually have to rewind a little bit, because in the 11th grade, I remember I had a friend, and he was a hockey player himself. And we were on the volleyball team together. And he had a personal, there's a gym that's called Extreme Fitness. That was a big commercial gym chain that lasted about a decade here. And so he was like, it was the hottest thing ever back in 2002, 2001, that kind of timing. And so Extreme Fitness, they were like the big new thing. And so Sean, my friend, he got a membership there, and we were like 16 years old. And then he was like, yeah, I even got a personal trainer. I was like, really? Wow. Like that's amazing. And so then he was like, yeah, why don't you come join me for a session one time? I'm sure he'd let you come in and tag along. And I was like, okay, sure. And so we went to Extreme Fitness, and I got the workout. Like, I thought that this trainer was so impressive. It was just like, it was just like, oh my God, like, this is what I got to do. Like, I want to be just like this guy. And he had a presence about him, and he had the great motivation and just everything about him. He was professional. He was like 6'5" as well. So I was like, whoa. And just like everything about this guy, I was like, oh, totally. So with that being said, I was like, okay, now that planted the seed as well. Like, I really respect that. I want to do that. And so I had interest at that time as well. But, when I was in university, I was like, oh, physio, chiro. But that little inkling of training was still in the back of my mind. And then I finally made the decision, okay, it's like, you know what? Healthy people, not injured people. I want to be outside of a clinic room and in a gym setting and whatever. And so that's where I came. So when I was 20 years old, I was still in school, and I got a personal training certification. I went for it. And so the rest sort of speaks for itself. And I got into the industry, and that was 16 years ago, right? So it was 2006. So this is going on 17 years ago now, actually. And that was it. So that's where it's taken me so far.
I love that. That's awesome. So you were one of the fortunate ones, and I'm the same too. Like, you found this stuff pretty early on, right? And I think that's a valid thing for us to dive into, because I know from even what we do a lot with the Axiom Fitness Academy, there are a lot of people getting into the industry at different stages in life, right? Like, they weren't lucky like us, and they found their love and they were able to make it. So speaking to that for a second, what were some of the challenges that you had in the beginning as a coach and trainer, right? Like, what were some of the biggest challenges that you had? And then I want to dive into like how, especially those who may be getting into training at a different stage in life, because there are some different variables there, can, apply some of those things as well. So let's start with first, like, what were some of the biggest challenges as you look back, like first couple of years of like really training clients? Where did you struggle most, or where was the biggest learning curve?
At the beginning, like, if you ask that question, the easy knee-jerk response would be to say, in the skills that it took to be effective with choosing the right exercises for the client, or choosing the right program design for a client, or something along those lines, having the knowledge, understanding what the body's all about. But 9 out of 10 times, a lot of that information will come to you from just straight up experience and not much else. You can read and all that stuff, that's great, but you have to spend time doing it to really get it a lot of the time, right? So I'm going to take that and leave that at where it is, and say that my answer to your question is really going to be, looking back on it, a lot of the soft skills that were involved with training clients, a lot of understanding different personalities and knowing what hat to wear when, and what kind of approach to take to motivating this client versus that client, and so on. One thing that you mentioned just a second ago about how in Axiom, there's a lot of different trainers who are there from different stages of their life. Maybe they've done the career change, maybe they're just getting into it late, whatever it is. They can actually be at quite the advantage when you think about it, because on the one hand, if you only lived one thing and you come out of high school, or you're 20 or 19 or whatever, you're getting into this industry, maybe motivation through your track coach or your weightlifting coach or whatever it is, and nothing else other than that. Maybe you don't know what it's like to work with somebody who's been sedentary for 15 years before they get into this, or who's been injured, who's had a surgery, or who's had mental health struggles for a really long time, or something along those lines. There are a lot of different things that can influence the way that you approach things using those soft skills. Now, when you're 38 or 40 and you're getting into fitness, there could have been a whole bunch of experiences that you've had, not only just as terms of just living life, but also being in a completely different industry, being around different people, different kinds of people. There's a lot more that can go into rounding out your approach to learning people skills and having those people skills. And I think that there's something to be said for that. And that's one reason why I think that me personally, the soft skills that I've developed at this point compared to, let's say, even 15 years ago or 10 years ago, they're very different now. And it comes with, age and wisdom, which I'm not old, but I'm much older than I was when I started, right? And, if somebody's coming into the industry and like approaching middle age, or maybe they are in middle age, that's a real advantage for a lot of different, there's a huge demographic clientele who will really appreciate that. That's for sure. And you'll probably know how to get along with them, appease them, accommodate them, and just build rapport in the best ways possible because of where you've come in your life.
I love that you picked up on that and hit on that, because I'm regularly on conversations, phone calls with people who are thinking about it, or maybe they're like in the process of, and there's a lot of doubt, especially those that are in different stages of life. Like, am I too old for this? Is this a young person's game? But yeah, I believe it's a superpower for the exact reasons that you just said. Because it's hard to hack or teach that at a young age. You know what I mean? Like, you and I were 18, 19, 20 as you're getting certified. So speaking to that then too, like, obviously I think it's an advantage as well. I love that you said that. So for anyone listening, if you are in that different stage of life, just know, like, you are very hireable. Like, if I had a job opportunity and a coaching, opportunity, I would hire you, because I know that. But for our younger folks, then, those that are getting in early on, how do you think they can best, aside from just training more people, which I think you said is probably part of it, any other like pieces of advice for them to better develop those interpersonal skills that you mentioned are so critical for success?
Well, I would think that just getting used to, first of all, I'll say this. If there's any young person out there who's looking to specialize as a certain kind of sub-demographic trainer, they want to only work with athletes, or they only want to work with women who are over 35, or pre or postnatal people, or something along those lines, I would highly recommend against that for the time being. Get good with a very, very diverse and eclectic group of clientele so that you can learn something from every single category of person there is, whether it's somebody who's a high level athlete, whether it's somebody who's a complete beginner, whether it's somebody who's 75 years old, or somebody who's 14 years old. All these different things are going to present brand new challenges for you as far as rounding out those people skills, rounding out the soft skills. You know how hard it was for me to work with kids like 10 years ago? I couldn't do it. I didn't know how to align. I didn't know what word choices to use in terms of what would get them going and all that sort of thing. And, I've got a 14-year-old client right now. She's a swimmer. You should see what the dynamic is like. It's awesome, because at first, even still, like, she was all closed off and very, very ambivalent towards speaking and being free and open with me and so on. And now we're like very chummy. So it's pretty good to see that, you can find a way to connect with each person, regardless of what, my oldest client is 70, right? And so like just that, and they trained back to back with me last week. Right? And so it's like, but that difference there and that diversity, that's what's really going to hone your skills more than anything else. So it's not just about training clients, it's about what kind of clients you're actually trying to take on, attract, and are willing to work with. Take on the client with a disability. Take on a client who can't speak English very well, and that's their second language, so you have to deal with that language barrier. Take on a client who can't speak at all, and they have to communicate via sign language and stuff like that. What about those kinds of challenges? Those are challenges that I would personally now I would relish the opportunity to work with, whereas before I might shy away from that. What about a client who's completely morbidly obese and they need all kinds of help, and there's certain basic movements they can't do, so now you got to really think about how you program for them. Likewise, what about a client who's got the complete opposite problem? They're like they're too weak and too frail to do too much with. How do we deal with this? This is what's going to round out those skills in the best ways possible. And you're going to be unstoppable if you take on that approach. So the first and foremost thing I'd say is diversify your client base and do not specialize with anything.
I love that. No, and I think the thing I love most, coaches, like I can hear your excitement and your passion about working with like these diverse people, because I can definitely relate. I know when I first got started, young male athlete, I was like, I want to work with athletes, and then I did, and then I got to work with like Gen Pop, and I was like, wow, they're a lot nicer to me. This is a lot more fun. Like I'm helping them in different ways. So yeah, I love that. Encouraging people to really like challenge themselves, train with clients that you might even like, I don't know if I can do this, because I think you'll get pretty far with it. That's awesome. So speaking of that then too, let's flip gears for a second. Tell me about let's just say like your training philosophy, like how you approach training clients, in general, right? We talked a little bit about like the role of personality and connecting with people, some of the soft skill stuff. What about training? Like, how do you look at training from an overall perspective?
Well, just as far as a general approach, I would definitely say that I like to meet the client where they're at. So there's no hard and fast rules for anything. And I don't say that everybody must do, must get to a body weight equivalent deadlift, for example, or, sure, it would be nice to do, but everybody's different, right? I wrote a whole book on leverages and anthropometry and all that stuff, like just to emphasize the differences in body types and how they're going to be affected by what exercises we select, and what programming and how weight is going to even affect us, and vice versa, how we're going to affect the weight training stuff. So all of that is just to say that like there's going to be differences with everybody. So how I approach programming, how I approach working out with a client, it varies, man. It really does. Meet the client where they're at. If they have issues that they're presenting, whether they're issues physically or issues from a mental perspective, maybe they're trying to get over the hump with something that stops them from being motivated to train. Maybe they're trying to, they're struggling with some kind of other issue that deals with them being comfortable in the gym in the first place. Maybe they do something that is very, very contrary to what typical training philosophy might be. For example, they love their cardio, but they want to build muscle, but they love cardio for reasons that, we can't align with. Maybe it is mental health related reasons. Do we stop them completely? Do we find a way to make it work for them as well, so that we can give them something that they need as well as something that they want? So just from the broad strokes answer, that's what I like to do, is try to meet the client where they're at and try to find areas where we can find common ground, so that not only is it effective for them, but it's enjoyable for them. Now, I don't work based off of rules. I work more based off of principles. So when it comes to the training exercises that I might select, I'm not about squat deadlift as much as I am into hinge pattern and knee dominant pattern, right? And that opens up a large window of possible options there without painting yourself into a corner or force feeding certain movements, right? And so I like I've told a lot of people on a lot of different podcasts and so on, my go-to with all else failing is vertical push and pull day, horizontal push and pull day, and accessory movements day. Like, you got conditioning right there. You got some great baseline gains that you will make as a client, especially if you're more of the novice category. And, it gives you the opportunity to train frequently, and it gives you the opportunity to really make some strides and focus on those larger patterns as well.
I love that. Simplifying the approach is kind of it's not a surprising trend that I've taken away from some of the other people that I've been talking with on the podcast. Some who've been doing it for a long time, maybe some who've seen success early on, but I feel like the simplification in how you look at things, and also versatility, flexibility would be kind of what I would take away from that as well. Just being able to, have an outlook that allows you to work with a lot of people and not be, painted into a corner. So I have a question for you in regards to, like you mentioned, and we'll make sure I love linking some of this stuff, because as you guys are listening, I want you, there's so much more beyond even what we're going to talk about here. You guys can learn from Coach Lee Boyce. And one of those things being the book that, as we talk on the podcast, just came out in like, the last 12 months, right?
Yeah.
Specifically on levers and leverage. And I know we've got a lot of questions in regards to information on the podcast about training and programming. So I know you as like the tall guy lifter, right? Mostly from like reading and following you for a long time. And funny enough, one of my first clients here in South Florida, when I first came across you, right? I'm fanboying about you right now, is a big 6'5" Australian guy. And, became one of my best friends, was like the officiant in officiator of my wedding. but like crazy long femurs. Like him and I would sit on a bench together and we would be at the same height, but then stand him up. And so like squatting, all these things. So I say that I know in the online world, in the writing world, you've got a niche, and obviously you're a big tall guy. So helping people better understand how to work around those things, and that leads to leverage. But tell me, do you have that type of niche, let's say in person with clients, because of those things, because of you and your stature, like clients come to you for that type of stuff? And the only reason I ask too, because I like the idea of people tapping into just their personal superpowers, right? Like we're given certain things, you're given like this tall stature in life, and figuring out how to leverage that in your own personal brand and how you approach training. So can you speak to that for a second?
Yeah, but I would say that there's a small contingent of clientele who definitely contacted me based on exactly that stuff. They see the weekly Tall Guy Tuesday posts that I make, and they're like, you know what, this
Yeah.
resonates with me. I want to work with you. Funny enough, actually, he's just leaving tomorrow, but he came 3 weeks ago from Kentucky. He was a client of mine who worked with me during this past 3 weeks. He was in the States. He had to be up here for some stuff with regards to his kid. And so he was like, I want to see if I can jump in a few sessions. I'm 6'5". I'm about 220 pounds. I've had some struggles with the big lifts, a couple of joint issues as well. I've been following your Tall Guy Tuesday stuff for a long time. I'd really like to try to get some sessions in. So that sort of thing does happen fairly often as far as clients who do reach out cold turkey like that. Now, of
Yeah.
course, for me and for anybody, for you, I'm sure as well, we know that the most effective and the most frequent way that we're going to get clients is by way of word of mouth and referrals, right? So clients tell other clients and clients tell other people and so on. And then all of a sudden you're working with somebody's whole family when you just started with just the wife, for example, at the beginning. So like that's the way that it usually goes. But yeah, with the cold turkey calls and stuff like that, where I just get an email out of the blue, I would say a good, 30 to 40% of the time, it's somebody who's like, I've struggled with my anthropometry, my leverages, and so on. I'm a long guy, or I'm a big dude as well, something along those lines. And or it could be a woman who's like, I watch your Tall Guy Tuesday stuff. I'm a woman who's only 5'9", but I have the reach of somebody who's 6'3", or something like that. So it's like, yeah, you definitely fit into these categories too. Absolutely. So yeah, I have a lot of people who are in that sort of situation, and it's really good because you're working with somebody who's living that problem themselves, right? And you're working with somebody who's been injured, who's gone through surgeries as well, who's been sidelined, like I'm all that stuff, right? And who's 6'4" himself with a 6'8" wingspan and all that stuff. So yeah, it's a niche, and now who's got the book too, right? So it's a niche of the trainee industry, or I guess the clientele, the client base, that there's not too much literature on, and there's not too much information that specifically speaks to them. So I'm happy to be putting that sort of content out there. And with the book being co-authored by Melody Schoenfeld as well, who's 5 feet tall, yeah, and who's 100,
It's
180 pounds.
perfect.
Yeah, it's a nice little juxtaposition there. And there's a lot of content for every body type in there. So yeah, that's been a real good thing to just have out there as a little bit more information, a little bit more directed content for the individuals who are looking for that kind of info.
Yeah, the reason I love that, and the reason I kind of wanted to ask that too, is because I think you kind of mentioned this earlier. Even the idea of niching too soon, or even feeling like you have to have this niche, that can sometimes be fake and created instead of something that's natural. I think that's where people to think about, even as you continue on within training, like the experiences you go through, the challenges you have, right? That's what they're going to relate to your personal experience, far more than just your knowledge of the science, I find oftentimes. And so I think, for one, I love that from you, right? It's how I found you even in the beginning as well. So it's very natural. But I think also for people to think about, like, those are the things that might help you create any type of niche that you have, your own injuries, right? Like that's powerful. All of a sudden you understand the clients who have had that same pain because you have it or have had it and have gotten to the other side. So I think that's huge. That's awesome. So I want to piggyback on your comment about like getting clients, and you talked about like word of mouth and referral. For those individuals who are listening to the podcast now and they would like more clients, or even if they're just starting and they're figuring out how they're going to get their book full, right, as we call it. How did you first start to get busy, right? Like if you look back, and you can, hindsight's 2020, what did you do that worked, whether it was on accident or on purpose, to get busy with clients? And how would you advise people try to start building their book of business?
At Extreme Fitness, when I was starting out, I spent the first 4 years of my career there. So I think first thing that I would say is to stay with the commercial gym that you start out with. If you do work for a big box gym, I don't think that's a problem or a bad thing. It's something that you should take real advantage of, because usually that means that you have a big membership base, that you have the opportunity to network and build contacts based around. You have the opportunity for your gym to provide you with clients, or to feed you clients, or at least some form of a lead system that's there. Even if you do have to close your own deals or whatever, it's still right there, versus you being on your own solo out in the street trying to make things work, putting out flyers or putting out whatever it is, or making sponsored ads and whatnot on Facebook or on Instagram or whatever. Those things, they might work, but a lot of times people will say, well, what will make me want to train with this 21-year-old coach who's barely just started, who has no references or anything like that? There's nothing there, versus somebody who's 15 years or 20 years deep or whatever, who's got all of these credentials, or who's got all these accolades or whatever. So I think that working with a commercial gym to begin is a very smart thing for somebody to do to start out, for the reasons that I just described. Now, one thing that I did to get busy, even though I was given clients, and you get your start that way, because clients will leave, and you will lose clients just as easily as you'll get clients, especially at commercial gyms, because whether they run out of dough, whether they're moving away, whether they're young and they're about to get married and move somewhere, or whatever it is, there are a lot of different things that change in people's lives, and you're not going to find as much of an elite or exclusive kind of niche clientele that are perfect for personal training. A lot of older people, let's say, who really need the training and who've been living here for the last 25 years and they're not going anywhere, and that's basically it. So because of the fact you're not only working with those kinds of people, and you're working with a very, very wide range of people, which is good, you are going to want to constantly be replenishing the stock. I always liked being a little bit too full rather than not having a couple spots open, because once there's a couple spots, it turns into 3 and then 5 and then 10, and then all of a sudden you're dead, you're empty. So I'd rather have the situation where clients are kind of fighting to get into a place, rather than, you know what I mean? And that's not to disservice the client, but more so to keep yourself always just a little bit topped up. Anyway, one thing that I would always do is work the floor. I was pretty good at it. Now, I'm generally an introverted person, but in my space, in my element, in my sort of element, I was much more gregarious, much more talkative. I was somebody who was able to just strike up conversation with people on the gym floor. And, it wouldn't even be in a way that was very, very, obstructive. I would just, hey, so when do we get to train together? Something along those lines. I would break the ice, and I would give them the free session. I would give them the quick assessment. I would give them a training tip. I would answer their questions if they did. It didn't even mean a matter of trying to sell them or pitch them right on the spot either. Just build a relationship. That's all you have to do. And so you give a quick tip. You don't ask for anything. You take some time. If somebody says, hey, you know what? Let's do a little 20-minute workout. We do a 20-minute workout together on one of your breaks. This person's going to be coming to the gym all the time for the next year or whatever it is. Maybe they won't ask you for a training session right then, but maybe they will in a month. Maybe they will in 2 weeks. Maybe they will if they continue to watch you train your clients. All of these situations have happened with me, and they all have contributed to keeping me busy over the course of that time that I was there. So I think that just being vocal and speaking to people and being personable and just showing personal interest is going to go a really long way for people in order to keep them busy, get them busy. And it all starts, in my opinion, with going for a commercial gym. I really think that working for a big box gym that's nice and busy is going to be better than working for a exclusive strength and conditioning center where you have to work under a whole bunch of coaches in order to sort of show your own ranks first, and then once you go up the ranks, and then you finally get one athlete that you work with, and it's great, but it's just a different path. It sort of siphons you into one kind of direction, and one which, if that's not exactly what you want to do, and it's not the right time in your career to say that that's exactly what you want to do, it might not be the smartest move, especially if you want to make a career out of this where you're earning some decent money and you can do things that you want to do, like, start your life in a certain way. If you're 19 or 20 or 21, these things are going to be on your mind. And so it's going to be a smart call to see what's going to get you the busiest, give you the most knowledge, make you the most rounded, and what approaches can you take to sort of amplify that. So if you're in a gym setting, you're in a commercial gym setting, you have all these clients around you, all these potential leads around you. Now you can strike up those conversations. Now you can pick out who you want to try to help out and so on. And that could be invaluable for your busyness at the gym. That's for sure.
So I would assume at this point, when you train and work with clients, are you training as a contractor? Do you run your own business? Like you don't have to give too much on that, but I just want to get some insight so I can ask my next question.
Yeah, I work for myself, and so I don't own a gym, so I work for
Yep.
myself and I subcontract out of the spaces. So it's almost like you're renting space to work with your clients, and yeah, you don't work for anybody except for you, and you
Yeah.
meet your clients whenever you've arranged to, and then you're out of there.
Yeah. And the reason I asked that, because I think a lot of people get in, right, at whatever different stage. They might know of like what you might do or how I train clients similarly here in South Florida. And that like might be the dream. But as you said, getting busy enough to be at that place. Talk to me about the transition out. Like, how does someone know, even if they're just thinking like, all right, I'm planning into the future, I'm going to get busy at a corporate gym, I'm going to build my brand, do these things. How did you know it was time for you to leave and do your own thing?
Well, that actually happened 2 gyms later. That wasn't even after the first commercial gym where I spent 4 years. Then I worked at a medical clinic after that, where there was a little bit more of that elite clientele that I was talking about, because it was a private
Mhm.
healthcare clinic, and so it was a lot of very very high rolling people who were in that space. And so that's when I spent 2 years there, and it was around that time when I was just like, okay, it looks like between the extreme fitness stuff and now medical clinic stuff, I have a good network of people who aren't only just training and then taking off, but they sort of revolve around. They obviously come back around, and like all of a sudden, like a couple of years go by or months go by, and then all of a sudden they're back in your email inbox saying, "Do you have any spaces? I want to start working again." That sort of thing. And so when you develop a network like that, where you start seeing a lot of that, or hey, you know what, my son is getting ready for a hockey season. He's 19, he's in university. Can you give him some coaching for the off season and stuff like that? So now all of a sudden you're in the family, right? Those kinds of things really speak volumes to, okay, I think that now there's enough respect, number one, but enough of that networking where you're now no, they're not going to look for anybody else. They're not going. You're the first person they're going to call when it comes to anything fitness related. These kinds of things are great to know, and it's a good feeling of a little bit more security to have, to know that, okay, if I went on my own, this client would follow me, and if I went on my own, that client would follow me too, and this client and that client. And so those things are just enough to make me say, okay, I think that I'm comfortable doing my own thing for a while. Even if I have to build up some more clients, I have this sort of baseline of people that are going to want to follow me and work with me, as long as I'm, accessible to them. And so that was the thing for me. And I did make sure that I wasn't too far away where I operated. So it's not like, I went 50 kilometers away from where the gym was. There are
Yeah.
non-compete clauses and all sorts of things you have to watch out for. So you don't go in the gym across the street or open up a studio next door. But if you're somewhere in that kilometers distance or something like that, then hey, they can still access you. They can still do their thing, and ultimately it's up to them to see who they want to train with. And if they still choose to stick with you, no one can say anything. So
Yeah.
that was one of the reasons why I felt confident. It was around 2012, 13 that I made the switch.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, that tends to be the more and more people you talk to doing it long term. Obviously, it's kind of the growth path, at least, like longevity for a lot of people. Not to say you can't make a life and a career inside of some of the corporations, because you can, but sometimes that means getting out of training and into other things. In your experience, and more so too, because I just know the people who are listening may not be at that stage, right? Or they're even ready to do that. Some might be thinking like, am I? And so I think you offered some good perspective to know, like, how do you know it's going to work, right? How many people are actually going to follow you? But from your experience, how long on average do you think that might take someone to accomplish? I know that there's going to be, right? We've got the other ends of the bell curve, but, how long do you think the average person can expect to get to that place?
Where they want to work on their own or work for themselves, it's going to definitely depend on the size of your city, how busy your gyms are, all that kind of stuff, of course.
Yeah.
But I would not do anything solo. It's also dependent on age, I think, too, right? But I wouldn't do
Yeah.
anything
Yeah. Yeah.
solo as a young trainer. I would say before my 5th year. I
Yeah.
would say 5 years in is at least where you want to at least get to that point. And people might be very, very anxious to get ahead and do it faster because you know that, okay, if you're only making, this many dollars per hour as a gym, but then all of a sudden, if you charge private, you could make everything that the gym charges. And it's like, well, that's great. And so maybe you have 5 clients who are active right now, or 10 clients who are active, and 6 of them follow you, right? But you don't have a network at the same time. So you go and you have all 6. And so you're making some decent money at the beginning. And then all of a sudden one falls off. And then you don't have any leads for another one, right? And then 2 more fall off. And then all of a sudden you're working with 2 private clients that only took you 6 months to get down to 2 private clients. And then you're trying to work so hard um, to market yourself when you don't have any baseline, you don't have any basis to do it. So better thing, like I said, if you do 5 years in one spot, or you do 5 years at least in a couple of spots where you're just building that network, you have those leads that are available to you. It's going to make life a lot easier for you, and it's probably going to build a lot of confidence for you to actually get into the private training space yourself. And so for me, it was after year number 6. And, and even still, after year number 6, let's not sit here and act like you and I both, and I'm sure that a whole bunch of other experienced coaches who are listening in didn't have the most tumultuous start and even periods past the starting point where it's like, oh man, this is do I bite the bullet and go back to a gym setting? Like, what's going on here? Like, there's a lot of crests and troughs in this. You have to be ready for literally anything and huge swings in business. Sometimes you'll be over busy, other times you'll be barren, and that's just the way that it goes. I had a slow first quarter of the year for sure this year. So look at me, year 17, and it still happens. So with all that being said, we have to be aware of just when we're doing things, the timing of them, and knowing that we're truly ready to take that step, because it's a very serious conversation to have with yourself.
Yeah, no, and I like that you mentioned that too, because I think people do assume like, once you're to a certain place, like no one disappears. But yeah, like you said, I mean, your best client, right? The person who's coming in 3 times a week, you love each other, shit happens, right? Like things are going to happen, like life will happen, and they may have to move. They may, they may be gone for months, like all those things. You just can't, you can't anticipate, which is, I'm like you, I like the idea of being over full, like where you're like you're figuring out how you can even fit people in, and you're forced to do like small groups. Like to me, that's the place you want to get to, because, then you just know, winter is going to come at different stages. And if you're the right personality, for me, I'm okay with that. Sometimes a year, like it gets a little slower. I get to work on other stuff, or like breathe and work out more, versus the other stuff too. So what has been, this is my last one relative to, let's say, the career. And then I want to ask you just about some industry stuff. I got some fun questions, pick your brain on. What has been better than you thought it would be about building a life around training and fitness? And then also like, what's been the hardest part? So starting with like, what's better than you even thought it would be? Like, what do you just love so much about coaching and training that you didn't even know was going to be part of it when you first started?
I think that the relationships you build with clients, as far as like, a lot of people think that there's going to be this separation, this gigantic deviation between being someone's coach and being somebody's friend or somebody's, just contemporary. And the truth of the matter is, it's impossible for you to work with somebody for, let's say, 3, 4, 5, 10, 12. I have clients for 13 years and not be on a certain level with them. It's not going to not happen. And so there's going to be, you still remain professional and you still make all your appointments and you still train them the way that you're supposed to train them and everything like that. But as well, like you will be friendly and become friends with a lot of clients who are in that kind of category. And that's it's a wonderful sort of thing, because, your network just deepens even more, right? All of a sudden, the contacts that you have, it's not only about networking for more training and more clients and so on. It's also, okay, hey man, like I need a new car insurance guy. Like you got anyone? And all of a sudden it's that. And then, hey, I hook you up with the nice mortgage broker who's going to get you a proper thing for your house right now. All of that sort of thing, right? So there's so many different other benefits from just building your network and building relationships, which is why a lot of those soft skills matter and why it's important to work really hard to keep clients, not just to attain them. Right? It's not really a feather in the cap for a lot of people to say, oh, well, I've trained over. When somebody puts in their commercial or their resume or their Instagram tile or whatever, and they say, oh, you have worked with successfully trained and got results for over 12,000 clients over the course, and they're like 28 years old. It's like, 12,000 clients that you worked with in person. You're 28 years old. Interesting. That means that you've worked with like so many people who did not continue with you. Like, I'd rather hear somebody say, yeah, I've worked with 300 clients over the last 15 years, and 150 of them stayed with me for at least 2 years, that kind of thing. And so that is the real benefit, if you ask me, is when you have that chance to build a long-term relationship with a client, because the networking and the opportunities and so many things, and I'm scanning through my brain right now, thinking of all of the different examples that I have of that, where it's like, whether it was job opportunities, or whether it was doing speaking events, or whether it was insurance or mortgage stuff, whether it was car stuff, whether it was, you name it, like just so many things that had nothing to do with training that were really, here's a great one. So I'm a professor at a college here in Toronto, and I do that part-time. And so there was a period in 2018 where there was a lot of strikes that were happening. And so the union was having real issues with what's it called? Like the board. They were talking about going on strike for things like more equal pay for the part-timers versus the full-timers and all kinds of stuff like that. So it just so happened, one of the lawyers that I trained, and I was just starting at that college at the time as well, right? And so I was getting hired, and it was during the strike, and no one knew when it was going to end. Well, one of the lawyers that I trained, and whose whole family I'm training now, by the way, but one of the lawyers that I trained was the lawyer who was responsible for being the litigator on behalf of the colleges that were on strike right now, right? So
wow,
that's really cool, right? And so he gave me all kinds of inside information in terms of, this is looking like it's over. Tell me what they're going to pay you, because I'll tell you whether or not that's good, or if they're trying to give you a little bit of if they're trying to Jones you a little bit, or what. All kinds of different inside info this guy was able to give me. And so it's like, who can say that they can get that kind of content? That's amazing, right? And so, and that was back in 2018. And so since then, I've worked with his wife. I'm working with his son-in-law. I'm working with his daughter, like his stepdaughter, just like, it's crazy. So again, networking, communication, building contacts, all of that stuff, and building relationships that last. That's the best part by far. That's by far the best part. As far as the worst part, I would say what we just talked about, if you're on your own, especially, the instability of fitness, personal training, and just doing this sort of thing, the never a guarantee context or concept of it, it never goes away. It never, ever goes away. It doesn't matter who you are, how big you get, how successful you become, or whatever. There's always going to be that factor that you have to work with. As long as this is the main thing that you do, which is working with clients and so on, that's something that you can't really avoid, right? And even with people who don't work with clients, and maybe they've launched a product, or maybe they have stuff where they've got a big following on Instagram or whatever it is, well, there's a lot of instability in that too. Because I mean, like, what if tomorrow Instagram went down and your main conduit towards selling your product or your program or whatnot is gone, right? Then what do you do, right? And so it's just, it's humbling, and it brings you back down to earth a little bit when you think about that. And a lot of people who think that it's going to be all horseshoes and four-leaf clovers as soon as you reach the 10-year point, or as soon as you get published, or as soon as you get, the amount of magazines that I write for, that I've written for, it's into the thousands in terms of how many published articles. But the amount of magazines and publications that no longer exist now, or that have changed to digital only, or that have stopped paying their writers, or that have, the list goes on. It's a lot. And so writing as a landscape has very much changed compared to what it used to be. And so that's one of the changes that I've had to deal with myself, right? It's like, okay, well, you used to make this much money from writing, and now you're going to make this much money. So what are you going to supplement all of that space with, in terms of, are you going to do more training, online coaching, teaching? Like, what do you have to do to balance things out? So the instability of it can be frustrating. It's never something that ever disappears or goes away. Some people might try to tell you otherwise, but don't listen to them. You will always, always have to be on your A game as far as hustling and grinding in this industry in order to make it work. Can't coast. And if you coast, don't coast for long, because there will be a time where you need to get really right back on your horse again and grind it out. And, whether it's marketing and branding stuff, whatever it is that you have to do to keep yourself busy in everything that you do. And so that's the biggest frustration. But the good news is, if you truly enjoy what it is that you do, it shouldn't be too much of a hassle for you to work hard at it. So that's the silver lining that I always like to look at things with and say, listen, I could be a cubicle ridden accountant or something like that, or bookkeeper, where I do not enjoy what I do, and times are hard, and I have to try to work harder and do overtime or whatever. And that's not what I want at all. So, I'm doing what I like to do. And so whenever the slow times do come, or whenever the instability does sort of mount, you got to remember that and then just put in the extra effort.
Yeah, life is a series of trade-offs, right? I think that like what you mentioned about the challenges, I mean, I think people, they need to hear that, right? Because you don't want to sugarcoat it. We want to make sure that they have a realistic expectation of what they're getting into. But like you said, if it's a passion driven, service driven industry, it's part of the job. It's going to come with it. But man, like you said, you hit it right on the head for me too. That would have been my answer to my own question about like the biggest benefit is just the mentorship and like all these things that I didn't even think about when I got into training. I'm like, hey, I like training. I like the gym. Let's make people sweat. And then it's like, oh, wow, like these people are like, they're going to teach me about industries I didn't even know existed. And you don't even have to ask. All you got to do, you take care of people, you ask the right questions, you shut up and listen. And it's pretty awesome, what you end up finding out. So
Yeah.
you mentioned a little bit, and this is kind of, the area where I want to dive into a little bit while I still got you on here is I'm not sure. I don't necessarily know in Coach Lee Boyce's personal brand how much you're doing in the online coaching and programming world, but obviously that's a huge conversation in the fitness industry, and it's not a new one. People think it is, but it's like the last 10 years things have been moving and shifting in that direction. Where do you think the industry is going in regards to in-person versus, right? And it doesn't have to be versus, but in-person and like online training. And then, for those who want to do well in the online or want to get into the online, like what does that start to look like? So first off, like how do you see that? How do you see the industry continuing to grow with both of those things? Do you see, is in-person training dying off? Is online everything? Like where's your head at with that whole conversation?
Well, I don't think that there's going to be too much of a change as far as the demand for in-person training, especially in a busy metropolis like one that I live in, for example. There's a rise of AI and different apps and so on that you could use for personal training and for the motivation and so on. They're popping off. They're really, really doing well, and that's great. But I don't think that that's going to usurp the importance of personal training with an in-person tactile coach who's be able to get their hands on you and adjust you physically in order to get you into the right technique and position, to give you that live feedback and all that sort of thing. And online coaching is the next best thing, but again, it's the next best thing. It's not the first option. Now, it's a viable option for somebody who might be fairly experienced with working out, knows the basics, is more in the intermediate phases rather than the complete novice phases. There's utility in doing online coaching, and that comprises 100% of the clients who contact me. They already know a thing or two about working out, and so they're trying to get from us from one certain level to the next certain level. Right now, I wouldn't take a client who has no idea what they're doing in the gym and try to train them online, because it's too impersonal. I need to be there, and I'd probably recommend somebody in their city, if I could, that they can work with in person, if they can swing it financially as well, right? Because obviously in person is going to be more expensive than online coaching 9 times out of 10. So with that being said, I don't think that the value or the demand for in-person training, especially in a multi-generational city, is going to be diminished at all. There are a lot of older folks. There are a lot of people. Don't forget, like I'm millennial. We're the same kind of age category where we're like a little bit younger in the big picture compared to, a lot of people who are, 50, 55, 60. Like there's just so many people out there who aren't all with it when it comes to Instagram or getting the tonal system or getting an AI app or getting all these things, getting on a Peloton and doing those kind of things where they're confident enough, or doing online coaching where they have all the knowledge or have enough knowledge to go and do a virtual coach. No, they're going to need that help because, yeah, they've been sedentary for a long time. They don't have that knowledge. This industry might be on the newer side to them as a whole in the first place because, let's face it, since the year, I don't know, let's say like 1995, I don't care, right? Since 95, maybe somebody was already 35 years old in 1995, right? And so when they're contacting you, like that's sort of past them, right? Imagine a brand new space, or brand new industry, or a brand new space of the economy opens up when you're 35 years old? How much attention are you going to be giving it in terms of getting as much knowledge as you can at that time? Well, you're not really in a place in life probably to really devote that much time to learning about it compared to if you were 19 or 20 or something like that. So now you're going to try to want to have especially if you're used to doing things a certain way, might I add. So now you're going to try to want to have a physical expert there to show you what to do, how to work out, how to exercise, and so on. And so that's a gigantic demographic of people that we should always be kind of after, because I'll tell you, they're in need of the help. They don't only want the help, but they need the help too. You know, a 21-year-old person who's trying to get big, they want the help, but don't really need the help, comparatively speaking, right? They're younger, they're not broken, they're pretty healthy, they're this, they're that. It's not quite the same conversation we could have. And their goal is much more of a, let's say it's a little bit more of a superficially oriented goal. I want to get bigger, let's say, right? Or I want to deadlift 3 times body weight instead of 2 times body weight. Those kinds of things you might do more frequently. With a person who's 65 years old, they say, listen, it hurts when I get out of bed. They say, I can't even play with my grandchildren because it's a chronic pain. Oh, my neck is always killing me, my back, blah, blah. And they'll go on like that. They need help because they're weak and need to get stronger. They need these kinds of pieces of advice and help and technique. And what are these movements? What is a deadlift? How are you sure it's not bad for me? These kinds of things are the conversations you're going to be having with the demographic in that category a lot more frequently than the 21-year-old category. And so from that, I think that it's very important that personal training stays around. And I think the personal training will stay around because there's too big a contingent of people who need it.
Yeah. So for the online training piece, because I'm sure you're teaching in the collegiate setting, you're working with young students, and it doesn't necessarily have to be an age-related thing. But I'll also sometimes get these questions, whether there are students at Axiom or people who are just in our free communities, who are like, "Hey, I want to start. Like, I want to get started before I do anything else. Like, I want to start building an online training business." What would be your response to them, or even for your students that you might have? They're like, "I don't want to go into in-person training. I just want to go online." What would be your response to them?
I think that it's going to be very hard for you to hone your skills by strictly doing online coaching. I think that once again, the foundation needs to be having a good base of in-person coaching, because it'll help you with identifying problems and being better at communicating. I think that the communication factor is the hugest part of this, and you need to be a good communicator to be a good coach. It matters so much more to clients the way that you say things versus what you say. And if you're really, really good at that skill and developing that skill, which usually comes from speaking face to face with people and being able to really be dynamic and work with them rather than creating a program and maybe doing check-ins with them or responding to videos and so on, it's going to be a little bit easier for you to succeed as an online coach, if you ask me. So, I mean, one thing that I like to do with online clients is, like, I will do the video check-ins and so on, but when I'm assessing those videos and I'm, taking in exactly what kind of troubleshooting tips I want to give them, I pull from all the cues that I give real existing clients in person, and just understanding the different approaches are going to yield the right result for different individuals, right? And so I just think about, like, even when you get down to like what people do for a living, what kinds of jobs people have, I believe the personality begets the job choice most of the time. Just the same way that I said, I'm somebody who's, I'm into the sports, I'm into this and that. I want to work with more healthy individuals rather than working with more patients, because probably my background had to do with that, I'm sure, right? There's a lot of people who might be in the business of wanting to work with kids a whole lot, and so all of a sudden they're a teacher at the same time, just something along those lines. I believe that the personality and what they're more prone to being like, and prone to working with, and prone to just personality wise aligning with, is going to influence what path of career they've chosen for themselves many times, right? Somebody might be very interested in the law and the legal stuff, and so they become a lawyer because of that. It's not the other way around most of the time. And so, having said that, how do you train somebody who's an investment banker in the most busy corporate setting in the financial hub of your city versus somebody who's a kindergarten teacher, right? Do you approach the way that you coach them, motivate them, cue them, talk about their hot buttons and troubleshoot them and all that stuff? Do you do it the same way? or do you choose the right hat to wear, the right delivery to give them? These are things that are, again, much more potent and useful when it's done in person to practice. You can do a little bit of it online, but not nearly as much. And for somebody who's already probably at, I'll call it a disadvantage when I say that you're much younger than a person, so you don't have as much life experience as that person, it would really benefit you to hone those skills in person first. And that's what I would recommend. I'd recommend doing the in-person training, even to go against what people say, I want to do, I'll just go out the gate, just do online coaching. Not recommended. I don't know too many online coaches / personal trainers who are in my circle who would say that they would recommend that. And I'll definitely be the first one to say that I'd recommend going in person as your bread and butter, at least for an extended period of time before you do go ahead and do online only, if that's the option that you want to take on. But do in-person training.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's good for people to hear that message from different people, because I think even between marketing and whatever, if we're on Instagram, you're getting hit up by coaches, who make people think it's going to be an easy go. And it's going to be work no matter what. Right. I mean, maybe if you build a couple 100,000 people following, but then even then, I know a lot of those, coaches or people who've created programs who've then gone to training people in person and then gotten better at what they were doing or figured it out, because it's not an easy process. So
Right.
I love that. I love your response. I got one more question for you. And it's, I say, kind of, like a Jekyll and Hyde type question. What is one thing you're really excited about just for the fitness industry and for trainers moving forward in the coming years? And then also, like, what would you like to see die, like a trend or, something like that? You know what I'm saying? So first off, like, what are you excited about what's happening, as far as where training is going, trends that are happening right now? And are there any trends that you would like to see just disappear?
I think the thing is exciting is a lot more women training in the gym with weights, and the stigmas associated
Love
with
it.
that going away. And that goes from, I'll say, not only just women in a certain age category as well, like older as well, like understanding the importance of weight training and strength training and resistance training as a whole, and why that's going to be invaluable to your path of life going forward. So seeing a rise of that.
Yeah,
And
that's
I'll
awesome.
say, on the same token, I'm going to stick with women in this one, and say, to answer your second question, it's a very important. I'll say it in the form of a message to women out there, and I'll say it in the form of this: is saying that, strength training is fantastic and it's great that you're taking it on, but every single workout does not have to be a glute workout. It doesn't have to all be glutes all the time. You can train more than just your butt. Okay, so upper body, when you start seeing the discrepancy between upper and lower body strength and capability and so on, or you have terrible posture, or you have really, really weak upper body musculature, but then you have your glutes that you're doing 6 exercises per workout on. It's like, I understand that it's trendy. I understand that it's something that's trendy to go after right now, and people want the glutes and all that stuff. But don't forget about your other muscle groups either. Okay, so your core, your shoulders, your traps, your chest, all those muscles are going to be very important for your functionality. Don't only train your glutes. There's way more to do in the gym, and your body will thank you for it.
Love it. I'll take that. Well, Coach, I know we could sit on here and I could ask you questions for hours and hours, because I feel like, we've just barely scratched the surface, but I like some of the messages that you got across and things we got to talk about, especially again for all you guys who are listening. Again, maybe some of you guys are further along, maybe you're 5 to 10 years, but it's like, I think about even for myself in, these phases, right? Like years 1 through 5, and then 5 through 10, and then 10 through 15. There's just a constant evolution in how you look at training. And I love that people are listening to this, because honestly, this is the kind of stuff that for me continues to push me along, make me think about how I'm approaching people and training, and my love for this industry. And so, Coach, I just really appreciate you spending some time on here. Thank you so much for answering some questions.
No
Um,
problem.
where can people best find you, connect with you, learn from you?
So I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, social media. It's all the same handle, Coach Lee Boyce. And then you can go to my website to see an archive of 1,000,001 articles and all that stuff. And I put up blog articles and stuff too. So that's leeboyce.com. I finally got my own name as my website instead of leeboycetraining.com. So as soon as I saw that get snatched up, because it was an artist, I think it was an artist who had it before. There was a guy named Lee Boyce. He was an artist. And so, yeah, I guess he took his website down. And so it was finally available like 4 years ago. And so I finally snatched that up. So just leeboyce.com. That's me. And you'll find, videos, you'll find articles. There's a huge archive of stuff on there. So good place to go. I'm posting on Instagram and Twitter usually every single day. Instagram definitely every single day. Facebook, I'm still on there. Not as much, but I'm still on there. And I definitely repost the things that I put on Instagram as far as articles and things published on Facebook too. So if you want to contact me for anything else, then lee@leeboyce.com is my email. So you can ask me any questions or online coaching or in-person coaching, all that stuff. I'm there.
Puh. I love that. Real training, no nonsense, baby. I love that. That's the slogan. I like that, guys. And everything that Coach Lee just mentioned, I'm going to make sure we have all those links in the description as well. Again, if you guys got something out of the podcast, then please make sure you guys leave a review, subscribe to the podcast. This is available on all platforms, including YouTube. And Coach Lee, I look forward to seeing you in person sometime again here in the near future. And I would imagine probably having you back on in the future as well.
Excellent. Look forward to it, man.